The current Ruislip Lido Railway passenger fleet comprises a total of 21 vehicles, which are a mix of covered roof carriages, open carriages and buggy wagons. Although the buggy wagons are not strictly passenger carrying vehicles, they have been included in this video as they generally only run in passenger train formations. Each carriage is 5 metres long, 0.84 metres wide, 1.69 metres tall and weigh roughly 1 tonne when empty or between 2 and 2.5 tonnes when fully loaded with adults. They can run in any formation, but typically for most operations, trains are between 7 and 11 carriages in length, with a buggy wagon in the middle of the train and a guard's van at either end. Every carriage has a 3-digit rolling stock number, and this has a significance in identifying what type of carriage it is. The first digit is either a 2 or a 3. The 2 indicates it is a covered carriage, while the 3 indicates it is an open carriage. The second digit is either a 0 or a 5, and indicates whether or not the carriage has a guard's compartment at one end. 0 is without, and 5 is with a guard's compartment. The last of the 3 digits is simply the number of the vehicle in that type, and has no other meaning. The carriages are all air braked using the continuously charged single pipe brake system, as common on mainline freight trains, up to a pressure of 5.1 bar or 72.5 psi when the brakes are off. This continuous system means that should the train accidentally split or air is released by operation of any emergency brake valve, the brakes will apply and the train will come to a stand. Every carriage has an unbraked bogie at one end and a braked bogie with a brake block for each wheel at the other. Connection of the bogies to the carriage frames is not of the common type whereby a bolster pin locates into a corresponding hole on the bogie. The RLR bogie design is quite fluid in nature and is only connected to the frame by a coil spring and 2 dampers on each side, and is effectively towed around by a torsion bar attached to the lug on the frame behind the coupling. This is not common as said, but it does provide excellent ride qualities. The other brake equipment, such as air reservoirs, the triple valve and brake isolation handle, are located directly above the brake bogie under a seat at one end of the carriage, and in the case of the guard's van, under the guard's table box, which is accessed via a lockable door. This differs slightly on the buggy wagons, which all have their brake equipment under the floor to allow for maximum carrying capacity, and the brake isolation is under the frame next to the brake bogie. Reservoir air release valve buttons, which allow air to be drained from the tank and the carriages to be moved by hand, are again located on the underframe and can be operated by foot to save bending down. Looking at the carriages in more detail, we first focus on the standard covered carriages. These are capable of carrying 16 adults with 4 people per compartment, and space underneath most of the seats for storage of small items during the 10-minute end-to-end journey. The old blue open carriages, which had served the railway well since the Society took over the line in 1980, were nearing the end of their life, and by 1984 the build was started in the railway's own workshop on a covered carriage to the Society's very own design. Construction of what would become 201 continued through 1985 and was exhibited at the Model Engineers exhibition in Wembley in January 1986. 2 further in-house built carriages, 202 and 203, were outshot from Woody Bay Works between 1987 and 1989. Although these 2 rolling stock numbers are currently defunct, the carriages having been converted to guards vans and renumbered a few years later. With the rise in passenger journeys, it was decided to purchase a further 4 carriages to the same design. These were ordered from FMB Engineering in Oakhanger and were delivered in 1994. They were given the numbers 204 to 207, and the only way of spotting these carriages today is the FMB Works plate found on the small internal roof partition. The final standard covered vehicle in the current fleet to be purchased was number 208, and this was delivered in 2011 from Allen Keith Limited of Ross-on-Wye. As with the FMB carriages, Keith-built vehicles can be identified by the works plate, this time located near the roof line on the end of the carriage. Standard equipment on the end of all carriages is as follows. A chopper coupling to the same design as the 2-foot gauge chopper couplings used on the Festiniog and Welsh Island railways, an air brake pipe and associated air valve, the train communication cable for the buzzer system and a tail lamp bracket. The RLR don't generally use tail lamps during the day, but the rules dictate that they must be used in darkness or poor visibility, and are powered from the empty electrical socket at the end of the train. The railway is fully wheelchair accessible, and as such the centre side panels of all covered carriages on both sides and the internal partition can be removed to create space for up to 2 wheelchairs, with ramps being provided at each station to bridge the gap between the platform and train. Turning our attention now to the 4 covered guards vans, these carriages can carry 12 people, 4 less than the standard carriages due to losing one compartment where the guard sits. The first of these was 251, constructed shortly after 201 in 1986. A number of minor modifications were made to that of the first built covered carriage, but was essentially the same design and featured a dedicated semi-enclosed compartment at the braked end of the carriage for the guard for the first time in the history of the railway. The second covered guards carriage, number 252, followed in 1990, and this was the case until 2003 when the decision was made to convert standard covered carriage 202 to become guards van 253. 203 became 254 at the same time, following refurbishment and a repaint at 7 Lamb Limited in Alcester, Warwickshire. The covered guards vans of today are largely the same as when built and are usually found at either end of a train formation. In the guards compartment, the seat faces down the coach, and the guard sits in the rear guards van so that they can observe both sides of the train during the outward journey, swapping ends at the terminus so they can face the other way for the return. The compartment itself contains a box with a liftable lid, which also forms a small table, and items of equipment to enable the guards to carry out their duties, which include flags, a fire extinguisher, a first aid kit, a T-key for unlocking the wheelchair sides, an emergency brake valve and air gauge, and the buzzer communication unit. The 12-volt communication buzzer is a later addition, and before this in-house system was devised, guards signalled the driver only by use of the flags. With trains now running in longer formations and the many curves on the railway, the guard often doesn't have a clear line of sight to the front of the train, so the buzzer system is used to communicate with the driver at certain points in the journey or to stop the train in an emergency. Based on the design of the first 5 carriages built at Woody Bay Works, but without the roof, 6 open carriages were ordered from 7 Lamb in March 1990, for delivery at the end of that year in anticipation of the opening of the Haste Hill extension. Prompt construction saw the delivery of 351 and 352 prior to the first of the standard specials, and provided more capacity for this increasingly popular event, while the remainder of the order 301 to 304 were delivered in time for the last day of the event. Over the years there have been various renumberings where the open guards have been converted to standard opens and back again, which makes it a little difficult to track their history. 351 was converted to a standard open by removal of the guards box and replacement with a seat in 2004 and renumbered 305. It remained like this for 7 years until 2011 when it was again reconverted to an open guards but was not given its original number back until 2019. 352 was converted to a standard open a year earlier in 2003 and renumbered 306. It stayed like this until the order of 2 additional open carriages prompted the reconversion back to its old status and number. The carriage received an in-house overhaul and repaint as part of the conversion back to an open guards, coming back into service in November of 2022. With numbers 305 and 306 now being free again, the order was placed with Allen Keith Limited for 2 more standard open carriages, and these were delivered in April 2021, bringing the total number of open vehicles to 8. Standard open number 304 was next to go through the in-house refurbishment process after 352, and was released back into traffic in August 2024. All open vehicles have the same passenger carrying capacities as their covered counterparts, with the buzzer equipment and the emergency brake valve located in the box in the guard's compartment. A crucial difference is that the open vehicles cannot carry wheelchairs like the covered carriages due to the construction of the body units, which are firmly fixed to the frame. The eagle-eyed of our travellers will notice the decals in the corner on the body ends of nearly all carriages. These are used to identify which end the brake equipment is, as it is not immediately obvious without lifting seats, especially in the standard vehicles. The A indicates that this is a non-braked end, while the B is the braked end, and the arrow points to which side the air release valve for the reservoir is. Finally, moving on to the 400 series vehicles, the 3 buggy wagons have been in existence since 2007. With more single trips being made across the railway, the storage of luggage and other associated items that passengers brought with them for a day out was becoming a problem. The initial solution before 2007 was to take out the removable wheelchair sides from 2 covered carriages and replace them with a single door in the gap, but this meant the passenger carrying capacity was reduced by 8, and over time damage to the paintwork was occurring as pushchairs and buggies were loaded and unloaded from the carriage. By a quirk of fate, the permanent weight tool riding van 506 was gutted by an arson attack in 2006 and was replaced by a brand new vehicle. Luckily for the RLR, the damage was limited to the superstructure, but the frames, bogies and brake equipment were fit to be used for non-passenger purposes. The workshop team designed and built a new superstructure made of wood to sit on the now spare frame, and a dedicated buggy wagon with a large single door on each side and ample carry capacity was born. Being a type of open wagon, it was originally kept within the same number range as the open passenger carriages and was given the number 307, entering service in December 2007, and the temporarily converted covered carriages reverted back to their previous use. Such was the success of the new buggy wagon, it was joined 4 years later by a second vehicle number 308, entering service in January 2011. This time the frames and bogies were brand new, built by Alan Keefe and delivered at the same time as covered carriage 208, and again the wooden superstructure was added by members of the RLR workshop team. At some point both 307 and 308 had modifications made, and as the picture on screen shows, the single large removable door on each side was done away with and replaced with hinged double leaf swing doors which could be hooked back against the body side. The popularity of a train ride through the beautiful woodlands surrounding the Lido meant that the railway was now regularly running a 3-train service on busy summer days, but with only 2 buggy wagons in existence, capacity for pushchairs and buggies was provided on the 3rd train by using the permanent weight bogie ballast wagon 505. This temporary arrangement worked well operationally but wasn't totally satisfactory. Apart from the fact that heavy items had to be lifted over the fixed sides of the wagon to load and unload it, the aesthetics of a bright yellow, work-worn permanent way vehicle in a passenger train wasn't very pleasing on the eye. To improve the situation, a 3rd brand new buggy wagon to a slightly different design was ordered, again from Alan Keefe, and arrived at the railway in November of 2022. It was at this point that the decision was made to give the buggy wagons their own number range, and the new wagon was delivered as 403. 307 and 308, however, retained their numbers for the time being, but after 16 years of hard use, the wooden bodies were showing their age, and rot had started to appear in certain places. Their last use was at the Santa Specials at the end of 2023, before being sent away to the Alan Keefe Works for refurbishment to the same standard as 403, returning in March 2024 and numbered 401 and 402 respectively. The newer versions of the buggy wagon feature bodywork in metal throughout, lined with stained wood panelling on the inside to accommodate bumps and scratches from loading the items carried. Speaking of items carried, although most of the time the load is buggies or pushchairs, many other things can and indeed are carried, such as bikes, scooters, picnic bags, deck chairs, or anything else you can think of for a day out on the beach. The brake equipment and single large air reservoir tank that was in a box and took up valuable space in the old versions was removed, and 3 smaller air tanks were installed, but this time under the floor to give maximum carrying capacity. Unless different operational requirements are needed, the buggy wagons are nearly always marshalled in the middle of the train, so that all passengers from either end have equal access to their belongings, and although some have asked or indeed tried, passengers are not allowed to ride in these vehicles. This video brings you right up to date with the status of our passenger vehicle fleet, which has been in existence for the last 40 years. Although currently the fleet stands at 21 vehicles, there will likely be future additions if the railway gets busier and longer trains are required. What is true to say is that each carriage is a workhorse in itself and has no doubt carried thousands of happy passengers all around the Ruislip Lido Railway.